Roshan, good to talk to you again. Excited to chat about your sabbatical. So, just as a way of a quick introduction, you started the Amani Institute, and how I kind of understand it and think about it is it's training and education for social impact leaders, primarily focused on the global South, right?
That's fair. I think we have a focus primarily on the global side, but we've also done lots of work in the global north as well over the years.
Yeah, like the on the website, I like the map that was turned upside down.
Hmm.
It's amazing. I mean, it took me a while to kind of process that. I think it's a really powerful visual.
Yeah, the flipped world. We have a
Yeah.
lot to learn from the global south as well. So yes.
So you and I got back in touch. You were featured in the Fast Company article on sabbaticals, and I recognized your name and kind of what you were doing, and realized that we had met, on the streets of Bali, I think, with a mutual friend over 7 years ago. So that was pretty
Hmm.
fortuitous. When you were
Yeah,
there, were you working or were you on vacation?
I was, I guess, workationing is the word now. I decided to remote work. I was living in Nairobi at the time, but I decided to just get away for a bit and do some remote work. And Bali was, I knew a lot of people were going there for that as a destination, and decided to do that as well. So I think it was around Christmas time. And so I then took a couple of weeks of vacation around Christmas and then spent a couple more weeks working, the first couple of weeks of January working out of Bali.
Cool. So after about 10 years with the Amani Institute, and you co-founded it, correct?
That's right.
So after 10 years, both you and your co-founder decided to take time off, or at least to leave. I don't know if she took a sabbatical, but what kind of prompted that decision to leave?
So it had been 10 years, and I feel like that's a good period of time at the helm of anything or in any one job or company. And I think we had felt like we'd come to the end of the first era of the organization. So we'd achieved the first set of goals of the organization. We'd launched in Kenya and grown to Brazil and to India as well. And we were financially sustainable and having an impact. And the question was, what's the next era going to be, the next 7 to 10 years? And as we came to an answer to that question, we also felt that if we were going to transition, we had to do it now. Otherwise, we're signing up for another 7 to 10 years. And I think for both of us, with different things potentially calling to us in our lives, it was a good time to transition. The organization was doing well. We'd come through the first year of the pandemic, having pivoted our entire model, and felt that if we've survived that, then we're in a good place as an organization for us to leave. And there would never perhaps be a right time, but also may never have been a better time. As well as that, with that in mind. So that's kind of what led to it. And in the social impact space, I think founder syndrome is kind of endemic, and we didn't want to be fall prey to that as well, and felt that the organization could do with different ways of thinking, different energy as it was looking at its next kind of phase or era.
Yeah, I was gonna say what you said makes total sense about kind of your time running its course and wanting new ideas, and but why do you think that's so tough for most people, and why was it easy for you all to step back? Was it a conversation that your board had kind of put forth to you, or had you seen it gone well or poorly in other places? What made you kind of take that approach?
Yeah, I think it was something that we initiated. It didn't have much to do with the board. It wasn't easy. It took about a year, I think, of conversations between us as we were working through what the new strategy for the organization would look like. And as we were coming to answers to that, realizing that that may not be, what we want to do, even though that seemed to be what was best for the organization. And I think it was really helpful to have a co-founder who, I'm very close to, just as a friend as well. So we were able to walk each other through that process of letting go. I think it wasn't a lonely experience because we had each other, and we were able to walk each other through that process of that inner journey, let's say, of letting go of something that you kind of birthed and brought into the world and seen grow and thrive. So it was really helpful to have someone who was also facing the same question to keep talking through it with. And so I wouldn't say it was easy at all. And we vacillated probably 20 times along the way. Should we stay or should we go, as the song goes. And then I think we came to that decision, but and in a harmonious kind of way, and it felt seamless, but I don't think it was easy at any point.
Yeah, so describe so the moment that you decided, y'all kind of both decided that you should go, what were the things that you did then over the course of that next year to prepare the organization for life without you?
Yeah, we had already been giving our second line of leadership more responsibility for things, and we accelerated that process a little bit more so that they had a lot more decision making power. And it still took several conversations to bring the team along. We also launched a search for a new CEO, and that in itself is a question of what are we looking for, what type of skills that connects to the strategy of the organization and connects to what we hope for the organization. And so even just the process of that recruitment process of who was going to replace us led us to have a lot of deep conversations about where we wanted this to go and how the team was going to play a part in that and so on. So I think it was helpful to have all of those conversations. And I think the last bit was just kind of, yeah, there's a lot to tie up, I guess, with the board. We also decided to revamp the board of directors as we were transitioning out as CEO founders, and so we brought in a new board as well to set up the organization for a longer term success that where the CEOs were not the founders, and so that's just a different relationship with the board than for a founder CEO. So there were things internally, and then I think externally, for me, I'll just speak for myself. I was also in a process of trying to, like, getting ready to make a personal move from India, where I was living then,
Mhm.
to the US, where my wife is from, and so there was a lot to do there with regard to moving out of an apartment and getting everything ready for that kind of move. Lots of paperwork. I was in a green card process at the time, and so a lot to do with the logistics and paperwork and so on. So trying to put some of that in place as well.
And when you announced it to the team, and during that process, it sounds like you hired an external CEO. Did you lose folks? I think one of the concerns that people would have is that you lose funders or you lose talent who are there kind of primarily for you, or especially if there's uncertainty around who's going to lead the organization. How did that pan out for you, and what did you try to do to mitigate those effects?
We brought everyone into the process of finding a new CEO. So we didn't outsource it to a search firm because we were looking for this role was a global role and could conceivably be held by anyone living anywhere. And we just felt
Mhm.
like a search firm wouldn't be the right place to go for that. And so we ran it ourselves. And so we brought several members of the team. All the leadership team was involved in interviews with the candidates for CEO, and I think that really helped. We were also restructuring the organization to build a lot more autonomy in at the local levels, and I think that helped as well. So we didn't lose any folks in the process at all, nor did we lose anyone in the full. I'm more than a year out since I stepped down. Nor did we lose anyone in that first year. I think now, as the organization is finding its footing under the new CEO, there's going to be a little bit of attrition and transition of folks in this coming year, but it really hasn't been as bad as we might have expected.
So what I haven't heard from you is talking about burnout. I know that for me, also running a social enterprise, burnout was a big thing, and I felt like I couldn't
Mhm.
leave the organization. As a mission focused person, burnout I think is more prevalent. How did you decide to like let go of the organization before it sounds like you reached the point where you had to?
Yeah. Um, I think we teach in our organization, we teach about some of the processes of personal management, like self management and self care and so on. So I've been fortunate to be exposed to a lot of the thinking around that. And so I think, again, speaking for myself, I was able to build in those practices into just into my day to day. I think that what I felt was most relieving, and I think burnout is defined, has clinical definitions to it as well.
Mm,
And I didn't necessarily have any of those symptoms. I think
mm,
what I felt when I transitioned, the big relief that I felt was not from the lack of work, but from the responsibility for people's emotions and livelihoods taken off my shoulders. Like that, I didn't have to
mm.
worry about, making payroll and, how people were doing with regard to their mental health during the pandemic and stuff. That I wasn't like having to deal with that anymore was, I think, the most relieving. Not having meetings was great.
Yeah.
So I think that for me the big relief was the relief from responsibility and not necessarily the relief from work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Just one more question around the kind of dynamics of leaving the organization,
Mhm.
and then we'll get to your sabbatical. But I'm not sure how the organization is structured, how your funding is structured, but what were the reaction from board members or funders when you told them?
Board members were a little bit more startled, I think, and they had a lot of questions, and we had to prepare answers to that and prepare a strategy and explain how we were thinking about this. My co-founder and I were both on the board as well, so we knew what those conversations needed to be. Um, we didn't. We're a social business, so we only had at the time one really funder of any note, and
Mm,
they, I think, were again looking for our. They weren't going to try to persuade us. Like that isn't their role in any way. They were just looking at like, okay, what's your transition plan, and how do you see this, this project that they were funding going on without us? And I think we were able to put in place answers to those questions. So I think it helped that we are, compared to many mission-driven organizations, we were a social business, and so we didn't have funders to really answer to, apart from
mm,
one, and that funder was yeah, just looking for what the plan was, as opposed to feeling like everything depended on us, which may have been a good thing. Like maybe it was good that the funder didn't feel like the entire viability of the project rested on the founders. That may
mm,
actually be a compliment in a way. They're still funding us. I mean, that project is still running. It'll come up for renewal in 2023. So that, yeah, it was a 4-year funding, and so I think we're in a good shape. But again, the majority of our income doesn't come from philanthropy, so
mm.
but from tuition and consulting fees and so on. So it wasn't a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say that, unlike the Jack Welch theory of leadership, if you can leave and the organization continues on, that's a huge success.
Hmm.
So I think that's something to be definitely proud of. Um,
Thanks.
okay, so let's get to the sabbatical. So how did you decide to actually take time off in between this and the next thing? Why not just move on to the next thing?
So I actually wanted to take a sabbatical. I've been wanting to take a sabbatical for a while, just for its own sake. I, I think it was a TED talk that I saw, or I just had the thought that, why is it that we wait till we're, 65 to go and do all the things we really want to do in the world, and if one of the things that I really care about is travel and having adventures, if I'm 65 and above, I'm going to be physically less able to do things than I can today. So,
Mm,
why not borrow against your retirement in a sense? Because I can still sit behind a laptop when I'm 65, but
mhm,
I can't necessarily, go swimming with whale sharks. So, I felt for me, the idea was, why not do some of that adventuring when I'm younger, and then if I need to work a few more years instead of retiring, that's perfectly fine, because that's actually easier to do. So I've wanted to take a sabbatical for a while, and I think about 3 years before the sabbatical, I made that intention clear to to my co-founder, and and we started to plan for it. Now, several things happened then. The organization's evolution, COVID hitting, all of that just meant that it didn't. And at that time, I wasn't necessarily thinking of stepping down either. I was thinking of taking a
Mm,
sabbatical and then coming back. But as I was saying, the new strategic plan and other things that came up made it made it also seem clear that the best thing to do would be to step down. So then it became, so I actually postponed my initial sabbatical date by about 6 to 8 months. To actually wind up my time at the organization and then go on sabbatical. But I had expressed that, like, I had set the intention for the sabbatical 3 years before and had been saving up for it. Again, I work for
mm,
a social business, a nonprofit social business, in fact. And so, I needed to, if I was going to spend a year without income, I needed to save up for that. So, for about 3 years before my sabbatical, I was actively saving, investing in the stock
mm.
market to see if I could, pad some of those funds and figure out how much of my savings I was comfortable drawing down. And so a lot of that happened in the 3 years leading up to the sabbatical, so that when I could actually go on sabbatical, I did it with a sense of having some kind of financial freedom because I've been planned for a while, and also knowing that if there's a I need to give myself a runway on the back end before I'm, getting another job and having a stable income, then I had the financial means to do that as well without compromising on, my lifestyle as well. So that was kind of the lead up to it in terms of the thinking.
When you thought about how much money to save and how much time you wanted to take, how'd you make those calculations?
So I wanted to take a year, and I eventually ended up taking 8 months. And it wasn't a financial thing so much as it just felt right. Like 8 months seemed like the
Mm,
right amount of time. Um, and I just put a number out there of, like, when I first created a travel plan, I created a budget to meet that plan, and it was about $50,000 for the year. And then the plan went out the window because of COVID, and so I had to come up with a different plan. We still traveled, but went to different areas and did certain things differently. Eventually, made that 50,000 stretch the whole year as opposed to, just the sabbatical time. But
mm.
that was how I thought about it.
And that's for two people.
No, that was just one person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so tell me about what y'all did. Like what did you endeavor to do, stepping back to kind of T-1 of the sabbatical? What were your intentions?
Yeah, so the intentions were, and again, we had to come up with Plan B because COVID made Plan A go out the window. So we had these kind of design principles that we came up with, which was that
Mm,
we wanted to go, and I think a lot of people might like raise their eyebrows or find it crazy that we were, traveling around the world during the pandemic, but we were living in India, which was very heavily hit by COVID. And then our eventual destination was the US, which was also very heavily hit by COVID. So our thinking was like, actually, why don't we go to places where there isn't COVID? So travel, like, it actually made perfect sense rather than shelter in place, to actually get out and about to places where it isn't such a big deal. So
mm,
we said, like, we wanted to go to places with warm weather, because we didn't want to pack too much. Outdoors, where almost everything you do is outdoors and in nature. So that ruled out cities. And again, getting your wildlife is kind of our passion. So that was a big part of it. So we started in Hawaii because that's where my wife is from, and I'd never been there. And then kind of made our way. It was well, the other interesting thing is that we couldn't do it I think, in a geographically aligned way because, again, COVID meant that certain places were closed and so on. So it was a little bit like sometimes we didn't know where we were going to be 2 weeks out, and we had to make a decision based on what was open, what didn't have quarantine, what was easy to get into COVID wise, where there was low COVID incidence and all of that. So it was a little haphazard, I would say. But we started in Hawaii and then went to the Caribbean for about 6 weeks, and then went to East Africa, to Uganda and Tanzania, where we did gorillas and chimpanzee trekking in Uganda, and then we went swimming with whale sharks in Tanzania.
That's my
Um,
dream. That's my bucket
yeah,
list activity, the whale
highly,
shark
highly,
thing.
highly recommend it. Then I went back to India for about a month as I was dealing with some paperwork and also wrapping up parts of life there. Then we did a road trip in the south of the US, went back to the Caribbean, to Belize, went to Alaska after that, and then went back to India again for another round of logistics and paperwork, and then Iceland and Portugal. And in the meantime, like the vaccines came out. So when the first 3 or 4 months we were doing this before vaccines. Then we got vaccinated in April in the US. And then that started to make certain things easier as well. And then by the time we got to the fall, Portugal, for instance, was like the most vaccinated country in the world at the
Mm.
time. Iceland had relatively low COVID incidence, so we were able to then go to Europe, which were, in the start of the year wasn't possible because of COVID. So that kind of we also kept an eye out on how things were shifting around the world and what was opening up as well. So that was kind of the 8 months really, and then we ended up back in the States, and that was our move to the States, at the end of August.
So tell me about moments that stuck out during those times. And one thing in particular I'm interested in is you're off ramping from this crazy 10-year experience. Like, at what point in time did you feel as though you were no longer like Roshan from Amani, and then you were, you know, Roshan from the human standpoint?
um, Yeah, I think I kind of worked on that identity piece even before the sabbatical. We're working on it for a while, that like my entire identity isn't wrapped up in the organization that I started and co-lead. So I did feel that sense of like identity pull. If it was easier than maybe for others to make that separation.
Mm,
um, Two things were happening along the way, in that one, that I was writing a book about the time, and along with my co-founder, about our 10 years and what we'd learned about social impact to careers. That was about a day and a half to 2 days a week throughout this even while we were traveling. I was, we didn't go anywhere for like a week or anything. We were usually like 2 to 4 weeks everywhere we
mm,
went. And so I was able to then take 1 or 2 days a week to work on the book. We also had to onboard our new CEO, so that was the first, I would say, quarter plus, like the first 4 or 5 months of the sabbatical year, was also having several calls with the new CEO and bringing him up to speed and all of that. So there was like the work element, or like the formal life was still part of this,
mm.
for a period of time. I didn't feel the need for a completely cold turkey, that I shouldn't think about this at all. I shouldn't think about the organization at all. I was happy. We led a very active kind of adventure travel kind of lifestyle, and then I was working on the book and having calls and so on, and it just seemed seamless. I didn't feel like I needed to really draw very strict boundaries around
Mm.
it. As long as I didn't have to, worry about making payroll and have
Going to
meetings,
meetings.
or deliver
Yeah.
programs. Yeah, I was happy.
Okay, so I'll stop you there. You've referenced it a couple times. What is the secret sauce that you're teaching about kind of people managing themselves and their identity, and preventing burnout? What are a few tips that you could give to folks that are either feeling like they're in that space, or are doing well, and kind of heading off on their entrepreneurial journey?
I think it's a lot of reflection, really. It's kind of self-awareness and reflect. I don't know if there's a secret sauce. I think it's doing the work, really, of
Hmm.
like being aware of who you are and who you want to be outside of work. Hard for social entrepreneurs sometimes, but I knew it was hard. So I worked for 10 years before I started my organization. I worked for Ashoka, which is the organization that, is the biggest social entrepreneurship organization in the world. And so I knew the journeys of social entrepreneurs. I knew the psyche of social entrepreneurs, and I knew what some of the pitfalls therein were. And so, right throughout, like I always, I think, took steps to not ensure that I was entirely wrapped up identity wise in the organization, or feeling like, it's not that I never came close to burnout, or maybe even I did burn out at times, but was able to take those times to reflect and constantly do that kind of self-awareness of, are you getting close to burnout? Do you need time
Mm,
to rest? Or are there, I don't know, are there like danger signs of different kinds, that maybe you're too wrapped up in this? A little bit of detachment. I'm not religious, but I understand, I appreciate a lot Buddhist philosophy of like detachment from outcomes in particular. So like, and so I've always tried to be that way, even as a CEO, was like, try to focus a lot on the process, detach yourself from the outcomes, emotionally, at least, and what happens happens. I think that spiritual angle helped a little bit as well, though I'm not an active practitioner of any kind. But just knowing about it, and being able to reflect on that, I think has been helpful. Yeah, knowing what emotional management, like practices and techniques are, was helpful as well, along the way. So, and I think, again, like, not being alone was really important, so that I had a co-founder who was walking the same path, who was aware of all the same tools. She's a coach as well, so she's kind of deeply aware of human dynamics and emotions and all of that, and so she was able to ask her questions, as we did for each other, I think. And so that was, I think, all of that, like, I think having that co-founder in the same place and aware of the same things, and going through their own journey but doing it together, was maybe something unique, and maybe not
yeah.
everyone has that.
Did she end up taking time off as
She
well?
did. Yeah, she ended up taking a few months off. She was also starting a family, so she had a baby during her sabbatical as well. She, as a result, didn't travel necessarily as much as I did, but she had different set of desires or goals for her sabbatical, I think, and also took a
Yeah.
much shorter time off, because she didn't feel like she needed as much time as I felt like I needed.
Yeah. Having a baby and snorkeling with whale sharks is not quite the same level of relaxation.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, and so you had your partner obviously with Amani, but how was it traveling with your partner, your spouse or whatnot? What did they take off time? How did you negotiate what you want to do, how long you wanted to spend?
Exactly. So, as I said, it was in the works for 3 years. So she was also aware of this and was excited to do that. So she is from the US, but had spent a decade in Africa and Asia. And, the events of 2020 in the US, in particular, with George Floyd, and the election, and all of the, you know, tension in America because of that, she started to feel like it was time for her to return home as well, and
Mm,
see what she can do from the US, or having been contributing to social impact in Africa and Asia, it was time to come back home in a way. Partly for my own immigration reasons, I needed to spend more time in the States. So we had kind of, like, it made also, she was also able to plan from a career standpoint, that she was going to make a career transition, from working as a consultant in East Asia, Southeast Asia, to life in the US. And so we did have a little bit of lead time to think about that. And so she
hmm
was also taking a sabbatical, making that career transition, from a different standpoint as me. She wasn't stepping down as CEO of anything. She had been a consultant in the impact space, but she was making, I think, a larger career leap, in a sense, where she was moving back home, and looking to see what she could do in the States. But so we were, in a way, in similar places career wise, and we planned for it for a couple of years before.
And while you were taking those 1 to 2 days a week to write, what was she doing? Was she kind of thinking about other employment type things, or was she unplugged and more in sabbatical land?
Both, I think. I think the first part of the year she was more unplugged, spend her time reading, or yeah, doing some exploring without me. But then in the second part of the year, while I was working on the book, she was starting to get more actively looking into employment and consulting and freelance work as well.
Did I find the idea of writing a book on sabbatical interesting, both because I'm in that process, but like this idea of you spend 10 years doing something, or in my case 7 years doing a business, and then like you leave without kind of writing a capstone. And so I feel like I haven't read your book yet, but this idea that you're kind of pulling everything together and trying to get the lessons down
Mhm.
as a good way to kind of like symbolically move on and move to the next thing. Do you feel like it helped you get closure, or did it help you kind of come to more different realizations than you had before? What was the experience of writing that?
I think that it did help get closure, actually, for both of us. And I think that maybe the book really helped in a way of like by pulling together everything and kind of tying it up in a bow, like that 10 years in a bow, which is the bow being the book, which like puts everything together in a distilled, easy to share kind of way. I think that really was helpful because it was that constant reflection of what did we learn, what are we taking away from this, what do we want to share with the world, that I think helped us get closure from the role as well. And maybe this is something that may help like people who are listening to this. But when I was in graduate school, I took a fantastic course in adaptive leadership, which is a school of thought within leadership. And one of the lessons within adaptive leadership is to distinguish between self and role, right? Like, so
Mm,
that oftentimes we don't distinguish. So when someone, for instance, let's say that someone is fiercely arguing with you in a meeting, right? And particularly if that's a direct report or someone who reports to you, it's really important to realize like that they're not arguing with you, the person, the human, even though it may feel like that, but they're arguing with the role of CEO or manager
mm,
or whatever, right? And that you are not that role. Like you are something else in addition to being that role. And so I
mm.
think like that was one of the things that I think really helped me most constantly reflect on the difference between who I was as a founder and CEO and who I was as a human, with other interests as well. And I think like the book may have also helped to clarify that in a sense.
Okay, and so then was it throughout the entire course of the time off that you were working on it?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, the
Mm,
book, I mean, we started writing the book as we were looking for the new CEO. So the first
yeah.
draft happened actually while still at work, but that whole second draft and, getting feedback from people, working on the final edit, submitting it to the publisher, working on the design, the layout, the marketing plan, all of that happened. A book is not just the first time of writing, it's actually that's the easy part. And then it's like a
Mhm,
long process of editing and rewriting and design and layout and publishing and marketing and all of that. So putting all of that together was like actually the bulk of the work during the sabbatical was not the writing of the first draft, but everything that
mm.
came after that.
Okay, so reflecting back, and you said that you kind of consider your sabbatical to have ended in September. What changed? What do you feel like changed as a result of your sabbatical? What learnings did you kind of come away from that period with?
I think I came away one of the biggest lessons I think I came away was just the value of taking that time, giving yourself that time. It's kind of like a gift to yourself. Like that's how I looked at it. It's like I was gifting myself 8 months, what became eventually 8 months without work. And really to enjoy that and explore and pursue other interests you might have during that time. And I want to do it again now. Like I don't know if it's going to be 7 to 10 years of this next chapter, but then I'd love to take another 8 months or a year off, and do it again. I know someone who apparently does this every 7 years. It's like a life cycle kind of thing, and takes a year off. And I'd love to do that again because it just is. I don't know about deep learnings or insights, but it was just like the freedom to gift yourself that time, that was really valuable. I think the like another thing would be it's that process of decoupling. While as much as I was able to reflect and have a uh, person in terms of my co-founder to do this with, it still didn't. It's still not like autopilot or anything. It takes some work, and I think that was really helpful to separate from what I was doing in the past in terms of leadership development and higher education, and then open up the door to what I might want to do in the future. And I actually spent 8 months, that 8 months. And why I think the sabbatical ended 8 months was that 8 months is when I started thinking about what I wanted to do next.
Hmm.
And I still didn't have a job and all of that, but I started actively trying to talk to people and apply for things and so on. And so depending on how you define sabbatical, whether you define it as like the time between two jobs, or whether you define it as the time off mentally.
Mm.
I'm defining it as the time off mentally because I'm still quote technically not working full time. I'm doing various freelance and consulting gigs, but not a full time job yet. But it was that 8 months was when I started to think about here's what I want to do next, and was able to like say it doesn't have to be anything related to the past.
Mm.
And I'm interested in climate change, which is kind of the area that I'm mostly pursuing now, which is not what I was doing before.
Was was there anything about what you decided to do or how you decided to think about work in the next phase that changed as a result of your sabbatical, or do you feel like you ended up in a pretty similar place than if you had asked yourself, on day one of your time off?
It's possible that I would have ended up in a similar place, but I do think one thing that clarified for me by virtue of going to all of these, places in nature, to see, in fact, the role of climate change, and how it's affecting our world, right? And in some cases also what COVID was doing to things.
Mm.
We saw glaciers melting faster than they should have in Alaska. We saw that in Belize, whale sharks are not coming to their. We wanted to do whale sharks again in Belize, but we couldn't because they're not coming anymore to their feeding grounds because of climate changes. And speaking to some of the people there, we were in Portland, Oregon during that historic heat wave last year, and actually like my wife got pretty sick there as a result of that. And so we were able to experience kind of how the changing climate is affecting the natural world and affecting us. And I think that I may have decided I wanted to work in climate anyway because I've been feeling that pull for a while, but this really solidified it by being able to kind of viscerally see what was going on in different parts of the world and how it's affecting wildlife in particular, which is a passion of mine. Um, and I'd love to see what I can do on the intersection of climate and conservation, because if I realize that if everything I did in my sabbatical had to do with wildlife, then or nearly everything. Like, why don't I make that my full time job? That
Mm.
seems to be my biggest passion. So that's something I'd like to explore. I mean, I'm not saying that I need to do that right away, but I'd like to explore uh, eventually the intersection of climate and conservation at some point.
Yeah. You'd mentioned before we turned on the recorder, I had posted a reflection post from someone else who I'd worked with, and you were like, "Oh man, I feel like I haven't fully processed it, or I don't know if I have these kind of things kind of tied up in a bow." Um, do you feel as though there's a pressure to do something next, or to like describe this in a certain way, or are you feeling more confident about the time off and
No, I'm feeling pretty confident about the time off. I mean, I'm trying not to feel like I need to write something about aha moments or epiphanies through the sabbatical, and maybe that will come. I feel like I'm still in that process of figuring out what's next. So, like, not enough time has elapsed to look back and say, "Here's what I really got out of it." Right? I think you need
Mhm.
time and space from an experience to really be able to look at it. One thing that I did, towards the end of last year, my wife and I, we watched this documentary series on Disney, I think it was, a National Geographic show with Will Smith called Welcome to Earth. I don't know
Mm,
if you've seen this, but
mhm,
in that it's phenomenal. It's an amazing documentary series, and in that Will Smith talks about his grandma Gigi, and he says, that his grandma says the best things in life are on the other side of fear.
mm,
And I think like that was something that my wife and I talked about as being a good encapsulation of our sabbatical, that we were overcoming the fear of professional fear, like we giving up things and moving, not knowing what is the outcome on the other side. But I was also overcoming like minor fears, things like I've never been a great swimmer, and so we spent a lot of the sabbatical doing water-based things so that I could
mm.
become a better swimmer and spend more time and less fearful of deep water and the ocean and things like that. And then maybe one or two other things that I think we were. For her, it was around. She'd been having some, anxiety around flying, and so like processing that a little bit. But we also did, we went kayaking and came across humpback whales that could have capsized our boat at any time. A kayak and thrown us into freezing water, and it was scary to be that close to these enormous animals. But at the same time, it was the best experience of the 8 months, to be that close. So it was like we really felt that like Will Smith's grandmother was onto something there, and I think that was if there's one distillation I would say from the sabbatical, it's really confirming the value of like trying to get to the other side of one's fears. And yeah, maybe in a couple of years would be the right time for me to say professionally that I got to the other side of this fear. But I don't think I'm there yet because I still haven't, exactly figured out what I'm doing next.
Yeah. Did you, not to speak for your wife, but do you know what she would kind of say about what her learnings were? Did you notice any changes in her, or what she was endeavoring to do?
Um, Yeah, I'd be hesitant to speak for her, I think, but I think for her, the big change is around like moving back to the States, like after spending this time away and giving herself time to process like the decade of work in Africa and Asia, and really more Asia. And then, how does she want to contribute to a US that is, obviously riven with all of these divisions around race and politics and all of that. And I think that's what she's thinking a lot about.
Hmm. That's awesome. I wish you all both the best. So, okay, just the last thing here. You wrote this book. What's the
Mhm.
book about? How's that kind of launch process been? And tell me a little bit about that journey.
Thank you. Yeah. So the book is about building a career in social impact. So over the last 10 years with my organization, we've helped maybe around 10,000 people, move into more meaningful careers or build the skills for more meaningful careers. And we've learned a lot along the way. And so the book is written for young people or people who have been working for about 15 to 20 years and want to make a shift in their career towards social impact. And it's written to help them understand what it takes to build a career in social change. What are all the opportunities out there? Like most people have no idea of how vast the field of impact is these days and how it's just growing. And how it's never been a better time to work in this area. So we lay out all of the opportunities, and then we lay out a set of principles, to help people to build a successful career in the space. And it's a global book written for a global audience, so it has stories from literally all around the world of people who've been doing this. The whole book is written as a conversation between us and people who are walking this path or who want to walk this path, whether it's a young person coming out of college or a mid-career person looking to make a career shift. So we've gotten lots of feedback that it's really easy to read and very engaging, and that was our intention. So we're happy with that.
Awesome. I definitely have a few people in my life that I'd like to help along that journey. So I will be buying it and shipping it to them.
Please do. It's called the
Any
new reason to work. Just for if anyone's
cool.
listening and wants to look at it, the new reason to work.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll include a link in the show notes or comments. Any other kind of parting thoughts, folks on the precipice of taking time off, especially as we're in the second, third, whatever wave of the
Mhm.
pandemic, what would you advise them to do?
I would say two things. Firstly, that there's ways in which you can give yourself mini times off or mini sabbaticals, like this whole idea for I saw an article in the BBC that called it a workation, where you can just like go somewhere that you want to go to and work from there, because so many of us are working remotely, assuming you can work remotely, of course. And I think I would recommend that, like, go for a week, go for 2 weeks, work for a bit, explore and travel during the weekends. If you can, of course, this is going to be different for people with kids. And me and my wife, we don't have kids. So I'll acknowledge that everything we did was only possible because we don't have kids. For people with kids, it's still possible. I think I know people who've taken 1 year sabbaticals and traveled the world with their kids, but it would probably look different. And so I think that's the first one. And the second thing I would say about the sabbatical is it's just a gift to yourself. And don't wait until you're young, until you're old and, have retired. Like, do it now. And, to the extent, of course, you can and make it work with other things in life. But I would say it's a great thing to do for yourself.
Awesome. Do you have any resources that you kind of discovered or used on the lead up to or during the course of your sabbatical? I know you talked about, I'm assuming the TED Talk was Stefan Sagmeister's, not
That's
my
right.
TED
Yeah,
Talk that
that's
inspired
right.
you.
Yeah. I need to look up yours now.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind that you would point people towards or that you enjoyed kind of reading or interacting with?
I know that there's been a lot written about this in recent times, but to be perfectly honest, I think it was like Stefan's talk, and then like designing this and thinking about this and creating this myself. Will Smith's documentary, The Welcome to Earth, I recommend that heavily to
Cool.
people. I think it really is a different way of looking at the planet. Yeah, I think that comes to mind. If anything else comes to mind, I'll let you know.
Awesome. Okay. Wishing you the best on the next part of the journey and hoping we can cross paths in person sometime soon.
Likewise, thanks, CJ.